So I was able to get my hands on an early, very early demo build of EVERSPACE 2, and I wanted to do my own little part in getting some eyes on it. Now, EVERSPACE 1 was a game that I really enjoyed, and if you're not familiar with what EVERSPACE actually was, it was basically a space shooter slash rogue-lite kind of combination where, you went on individual runs in a first or third person sort of light arcadey space sim kind of actiony combat thing where you could go all around these various areas and try and get farther and farther each time and get resources and explore and destroy things and all that sort of stuff. It was roguelite, but it was not in a very standard mold of roguelite, which was part of the reason I liked it so much, I think, because there's a lot of changes that you have to make to a space sim or to a space game in order to actually have those two things mesh well together, but they actually did a really good job. It had a very successful Kickstarter and eventually a really nice finished product that was a lot of fun to play. However, they have announced that they're making a sequel, and EVERSPACE 2 is not going to be a roguelite. Excitingly enough, it is actually going to be a full-on campaign action RPG in space. So, think Diablo, basically, but with all of the perks and loot and stuff that brings, but in a sort of arcadey space sim. So EVERSPACE 2 is currently quite a ways out, and a lot of this is information from the current Kickstarter, so I will of course link you in the description below to the Kickstarter page, so if you want to take a look at it yourself, you can. And right now they're hoping for a kind of early access release in September of 2020, so it's still about a year out if that pans out, and I have a feeling it will. The Kickstarter is going quite well right now. And also, they're hoping for a sort of like Q3 2021 full release, so it's going to be in early access for about a year or so, and that definitely mirrors the way that the first EVERSPACE was handled, and I think that actually should bring a fair amount of confidence in the product, considering that they have successfully done this before and created something really fun. So this time around, they're hoping for about a 20 to 30 hour full-on campaign with leveling up and skills and perks to unlock and tons of loot to find, and I think they said around like 100 ships. There's going to be a huge variety in ships to find and customize, and the ships will all adhere to various classes and subclasses, which is really cool to me because that's sort of one of my favorite parts of the whole like action RPG experience, is having things separated by these classes and having all the variety in each one that entails, and they're going to do that, but in a sci-fi space sim setting, so it's going to be ship classes rather than character classes, and I think it should be pretty interesting. So they're also promising a lot more variety in terms of content, in terms of the places you can go. What you're seeing right now is just, some simple stuff that's available currently in the demo build. It's a lot of stuff that will remind you of the first EVERSPACE, but shored up a lot with some new mechanics and a lot of polish in terms of the overall combat feedback and variety in weapons, and the fact that there are actual loot rarities now, so you can find weapons and systems like shields and engines and the like that have all sorts of various special procs and things like that involve these new sort of loot rarities, which is really cool, actually. I found some pretty interesting stuff already, including some like epic and legendary kind of stuff that was pretty neat. You'll see some later in the video that's like a sort of crazy pulse cannon thing that has all sorts of like percentage-based procs on it. I love that sort of stuff, so I'm happy that that's in here. And they're also going for, rather than the roguelite sort of node-to-node like arena-based progression sort of the original, they're going for a full-on like open universe, or a galaxy perhaps, where you can actually do faster than light travel to get to various different star systems and the like and explore those areas, and then you'll be able to also find these warp gates that will allow you to go between much larger, farther apart areas. In the classic vein of a traditional space sim, like one of the X games or something like that. It's going to be that sort of world, only with an action RPG sort of bend to it, which is pretty exciting to me because those are things that I definitely enjoy, and combining them, well, that's pretty exciting, and I think that these guys are probably some of the ones that would want to do it the most because of how solid they actually made EVERSPACE in terms of its combat and its overall like gear variety and things like that. So to see them sort of untethered with all these new ship designs and all these new weapon designs and loot rarities and all this other sort of stuff, it gives me that sense of the game they've always wanted to make. Basically, I'm sure you probably know what I'm talking about. You've gotten that feeling before when there are certain studios that make smaller things at first, and then eventually they have sort of a passion project, something larger, something that is a culmination of what they've learned so far, and it sort of ends up being the thing that they've wanted to make for a while, and now that they have the experience and money to do so, it usually ends up being a really enjoyable product, and that's the sort of feeling that I get from EVERSPACE 2 so far and what they're actually looking to do with it. Some things I've noticed from the demo that have changed are a bit more of a focus on ship individuality, with the different equipable item types actually determined by the ship itself. So kind of like how, you may find a certain piece of gear that is only for the Necromancer in Diablo 2, you will find a certain weapon that maybe only one of the more combat-focused ships or one of that particular class can actually equip, like a medium combat class, and so on and so forth. So there's a certain amount of customization I'm assuming that they're going to allow you to do as well, and right now it's things like activatable abilities like EMP generators, cloaking fields, and some other stuff like that that are heavily determined by the sort of ship and class of the ship that you're actually flying. And there are also a different number of slots and possible things you can actually slot into those slots depending on the ship class as well. So I think there's going to be a much larger focus on the sort of individuality of the ships, given that they're going for like action RPG classes for the ships rather than just like a ship model. So that does speak well to possible variety and replayability and things when there's all this variety in ships that you can fly and things that you can strap on them and probably blow yourself up. And it's looking to be a pretty interesting system of trying to translate the character-based action RPG tropes to ships in a space sim, it's pretty ambitious, I would think, because some of the only sort of action RPG, like sci-fi or space ARPGs I can think of have been things like Drox Operative and other stuff like that are Space Pirates and Zombies even, and they're 2D for the most part. And so having a full-on like 3D space sim-esque version of this is a little bit different, and it's going to be difficult, I think, to actually balance it and get everything done correctly in terms of the variety and help players with the whole replayability aspect by having all this loot and stuff to find. But I think that if anyone can do it, that these guys definitely can, given their previous track record. I've also noticed several sort of side things to do, and I don't just mean side quests, although those definitely do exist. I also mean just like not necessarily collectibles, but things that you can just happen upon and interact with. Like, for instance, you'll occasionally find these little black misty things that have these this sort of creepy audio around them. They're just called shadow creatures, and they're always in a pair. There are two of them somewhat near each other, and what you're meant to do is actually find both of them and then sort of tractor beam one to the other. You just grab one shadow creature and you run it to the next one, although they don't seem to stay on you for very long. I think the purpose of that is you have to get them to the other one in time. It's like a time-based little side mission, and if you do it, they join together and it says that they found a mate, which is kind of creepy if you think about it, but then they'll reward you with some special stuff, like dark matter, for instance, seems to come from them. And I think that is going to be kind of a theme of the game in general, of some of the stuff that you can do and find. I think that given that it's going from a sort of, node-based roguelite to a full-on like open world sim, I think they're going to probably focus on these things a lot, things that you can just happen upon, things to find that will reward you with some extra loot or some extra resources, and are just fun things to find and see and do that will reward you for actually exploring these areas, because rewarding exploration is one big part of an action RPG, because you're generally risking yourself to explore an area more and more with enemies warping in or teleporting in or whatever, depending on the game you're playing. And so it makes actually exploring things more completely important, but also dangerous, so that you want to be rewarded justly for it. And they definitely seem to have that down already, because I've found several things that are just kind of lying around, that if you explore around and kill some enemies around the place and just sort of take a little bit of agency on your own, and places that quests don't deliberately lead you to, you just sort of happen upon them, that you'll find some neat things to do and get rewarded for it if you can figure out what to actually do there. And I think that that's a good idea. I want to see a lot more of that, because that's going to help flesh out the areas a lot and help make the individual places you go feel a little bit more alive when there's a whole bunch of stuff to see and find within them. They've also teased a couple of new area types, which are pretty interesting. Unfortunately, they're not in the demo right now, but I can tell you about them. For one, they've promised the ability to go into capital ships, just gigantic, enormous ships, and actually take them apart from the inside, go around and find ways to disable or destroy them from the inside out. And they've even mentioned things like destroying their fusion core, the huge sort of generator at the heart of the ship, and just trying to make sure to get out of there in time alive so that it'll blow up and take the ship with it and you'll be safe. And that's a really cool idea. I like the idea of actually going into large ships and just taking them apart piece by piece from the inside, instead of having to always face them from the outside. I think that's something that a lot of space games have actually missed an opportunity on, given that a lot of times we're in a fighter or some sort of small ship when we're going against huge ships. It's cool to be able to actually do stuff like that. And they've also teased planet surfaces, which is really exciting to me, because in the first EVERSPACE, you were always, well, you were in space. Not that much of a surprise, but you were often in either planetary orbit, like you're seeing right now, or in like asteroid fields and the like, or around like derelicts and stuff. So having even more variety in areas, some of which are not actually in open space, but are on planetary surfaces, that's really cool. And in fact, if you check the Kickstarter link below this video, you'll see some footage of exactly that. You'll see a sort of desert planet with some cool combat going on. That's really interesting to me because going from actual full-on space exploration to planet surface fighting and stuff is a really cool change, and not very many games actually do that. And oftentimes the games that do allow you to actually land on simulated planets, generally you don't actually get to explore and fight around those planetary surfaces. Usually a game sort of focuses on one or the other, so the ability to switch between the two and actually have a lot more varied locations in terms of where you can fly around, that's pretty exciting. And also they've mentioned the fact that, of course, on a planetary surface, you are not in zero gravity, so presumably there are certain things about the physics and stuff that will change when you actually go to those areas, which is, again, very exciting because making you sort of get used to a bit of a different way to play based on where you are is always fun for me. So having the whole gravity situation actually being directly addressed in terms of going to a planetary surface is pretty cool. I presume that there will be some flight physics and some other, like, you know, loot grabbing and stuff like that that is altered a bit depending on what you have equipped on your ship because, well, you're not in space anymore. The Kickstarter currently has 6 days to go at the time of recording this, and like I said, I definitely recommend you check it out in the description below this video, even if you don't want to like submit anything to it right now, if you're not like wanting to back it, just to look at what the game is actually going to be, to see some of the more new interesting stuff that they're promising and stuff like that, and how far along it currently is. Overall, I think it is very exciting because EVERSPACE was a very cool game that definitely needed some sort of expansion to its mechanics. It was a great sort of proof of concept for a really good combat engine and some really very pretty space exploration. So the fact that they've actually gone the, I guess you could kind of say like the Half-Life 2 sequel route, where it's like the same kind of thing but just more, like it's the same idea but without as many limitations and with just a whole bunch more to it, is a really good thing to me because I felt that that's exactly what EVERSPACE actually needed. So I'm definitely hyped to see that EVERSPACE 2 is actually doing that. It's taking that route of making the same sort of foundation that the original game had, taking that and actually bringing it up with a whole bunch of new things and opening it up a bunch and just cracking it open and changing a bunch of things to make it more varied and hopefully more interesting and a lot more long-lasting for people, perhaps because of all the variety, all of the replayability, and the fact that it is actually a full-on campaign rather than a run-based game. And although I definitely enjoy my roguelites, as anyone who watches the channel will know, it's also awesome to see another, you know, a space game, a full-on actual space game. We don't have a whole lot of those right now, and 2020 is looking to be a pretty big year in terms of actual space sims and space shooters and the like actually coming out and sort of helping to continue the revival, the slow but sure revival of that genre on PC. So having EVERSPACE 2 be a big part of that is pretty great. And really my overall impressions of the EVERSPACE 2 demo as it currently stands is it's a really solid base for a game that I can see expanding a lot from this and hopefully becoming exactly what they want. What they want is clearly what they've wanted to make for a while, and playing it already, even though it's in a very early alpha state, you can see the blueprint in place right now, and you can see all the points for it to expand and all the places for it to go with all the loot variety and all the new ships and all the new places for you to fly around. So it's an exciting project that I am absolutely going to keep an eye on, and I would recommend that you definitely do the same. If you're a fan of space shooters, if you liked EverSpace, if you just want a new space sim, you know, there are all sorts of different crossovers here. So yeah, that is EverSpace 2 in its current state, or how I've personally interpreted its current state. And like I mentioned, the description below will have a link to the Kickstarter page for you to look at, and you can absolutely expect me to be playing more of this and showing you more when more becomes available. The next time any sort of major build is released, I will absolutely be right there waiting, chomping at the bit to see exactly what it's like. So thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.